Welcome back to Body Talk with Becks. This week I had the pleasure of speaking with Kirsteen Lupton. She's from Scotland and was born with bladder exstrophy, just like me. So let's just jump right on into this interview.
Right. So, first of all, I want to know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Okay, let's hear it. How did you say it? Sorry?
Kirsteen?
Yes.
Yes?
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Did you get coached by Tom on how to do that? Because a lot of
No.
Americans don't, they say it as like Kirsteen. So like, I don't know why. So yeah, I thought maybe Tom would have told you it's Kirsteen.
No, I was just guessing.
Well, yeah, good guess. You are pronouncing it right.
Thank you. Yay.
Yes.
Like, I don't want to be butchering your name the entire time we're talking.
It's okay. I've been called worse. So.
So, you had bladder exstrophy.
I do, yes, I do. So I was born with bladder exstrophy in 1993. And when I was listening to your podcast around how when you were born, your mum didn't have the luxury of Facebook pages and everything else. So when you were talking about how she kind of had to go out and do a lot of research, it really resonated with me because my parents basically went and did the exact same thing. They were looking up, I don't know if you remember, but you'd have like massive medical journals with everything in them. And then my mum and dad kept one and that they'd used originally, and literally it must have been about 5,000 pages. And there was like maybe a paragraph about bladder exstrophy. And they were like, what is this? So yeah, I thought that was actually quite interesting because I was just listening, like we've basically been through a lot of really similar experiences and in completely different countries, which was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you were only born a year after me. So we were kind of grew up in the same generation of like medical technology too.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting.
Absolutely. Technology, understanding. And yeah, I think, I don't know what the level, obviously the level of understanding now is a lot sort of broader and it's a lot more spoken about, but I do think that social media has had a massive impact on that, because what I've found on things like Facebook and stuff is that people are sharing what they've been through, and just seeing, you know, what parents of children with bladder exstrophy are now being offered in terms of procedures and stuff. I mean, that was just scientific dreaming for us, wasn't it? It just felt like complete sci-fi. And now you just kind of read it and you think, that's amazing that it's come. And I like to think I'm still young. So like in such a short amount of time, you know, for all these procedures, because there was one procedure called the Kelly procedure, and I'm not a doctor and I don't know exactly how it works, but I remember when I'd first heard about it, I was really excited at the prospect of the potential of being able to not have to use a catheter to void my bladder. But it was very fresh, and when I kind of pitched the idea to mum and dad, I don't do well with anesthetics, I don't do well with operations, I have severe anxiety issues when it comes to that. So mum and dad had kind of said, I don't, you know, is it worth it? You know, after everything you've been through, do you want to put yourself through it again? And it's all new and fresh, and you know, it's not been done on that many patients. Whereas now I'm scrolling through and all these parents are like, oh, they've had the Kelly procedure. And when you talk about the Mitrofanov procedure, which we've obviously spoken about in previous episodes, everybody's kind of going, oh, what's that? That must be quite old school. And you're like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like, it doesn't feel that old school, but it obviously, you know, it is. And to be fair, I don't think now I would have it any other way. Now that I'm a bit older, I'm like, no, I'm good with where I'm at. But yeah, it's really interesting just seeing what other people are dealing with and going through now, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah. It does make you feel a little bit old looking at like some of the new stuff that is available.
Yes.
And wow, that's gone a long way since like I had the option of, you know,
Yeah, you go on to give advice, and then it's like, oh, my advice is about 20 years out
Yeah,
of
it's
date.
too
Like,
old.
yeah, and you're like, I'll let the other ones answer this then. And it does,
Yeah.
it feels quite strange. And then you sometimes feel a bit like a fish out of water. And I think actually what is really interesting about this conversation is that it's constantly changing, you know, the treatment and stuff for extrophy patients, because I'll speak to people who are maybe 15, 20 years older than me, and they're saying that the procedure that we had done was really modern, and for them that was like sci-fi, and they would have loved to have had that option. So it's quite interesting, because I always think that it's not very researched and there aren't a lot of advancements in it because it's such a rare condition. But with the amount of different things that are happening, if you look back through the years of treatment options, it's always advancing. And whether or not that's because people are particularly researching extrophy, or, you know, it's coming from other areas of research where you've got those few kind of golden minds going, that would work for extrophy patients. You just think it's always advancing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, luckily.
I know.
Yeah,
it does. It makes you feel a bit more fortunate, and about the future as well, because obviously, you know, we're lucky with where we are now, but you never know what our bodies might throw at us in the future. Hopefully nothing.
Hopefully not too much.
I know, touch wood.
So I think one of the main things I noticed that's different between what you grew up with and what I grew up with was that when I was born, the surgery that I had right away, they actually put my bladder back in my body. And so it sounded like you didn't have that. You had your bladder on the outside for quite a while, it sounded like.
Yeah, so when I was born, that wasn't a priority at all, to get my bladder back on the inside. So my first surgery, I was 4 hours old. And the idea, I don't know if you had the same thing, but I was basically in a cast for a long time. They'd like broken my hips to put my bones back together the way that they should have been.
Oh my goodness.
And apparently that's the kind of fix. The way they put it is people with extrophy have got a different walk because their gait, as they say, is wider. So if you watch me walking, my feet, I'm doing this and I know it's a podcast, but so that you can see, my feet kind of point outwards.
Mine do,
if that
too.
Makes sense. And apparently that's because of what it's part of having extrophy. So that was my first surgery, and putting my bladder back in my body didn't seem to be a massive thing, which I think must have been really tough for my parents. And I think, so when I got my mitrophin off, I think I must have been about 4 when I had it. And what they did was they put my bladder back in my body, but they gave me an external stoma. So you could basically see it. And it looked actually just like part of my bladder was still on the outside of my body. And for years, I thought that was the case. And then when I was speaking to mum and dad about it, they had said, no, that was actually an external stoma. But I had thought that they'd just moved my bladder and left some of it outside. And similarly to you, the initial hospital and surgeon that I went to, they weren't overly experienced at all. And I'm not here to kind of name names and slate anybody, but they went in and they were doing their best. But I think every time I went in for surgery, I was coming out worse, you know, because they were trying different things. So the last surgery that I'd had was when I came out with the external stoma. I had no control over my bladder, so I was still having to wear nappies. And that was a really big thing for me. I wanted to wear big girl pants, you know, because
I had that same too.
Yeah, like you're going to school and you're in nappies, and that's not such a big thing. But when you're going out shopping with your friends or with your mum for clothes, and you see all these cute wee underwear and your friends are buying it and you're not, and like I think that it's times like that you think, oh, I am different. And I never think like that so much, but that was always my big thing when I was young. I wanted a belly button and I wanted to wear big girl pants. And I remember mum and dad had said that to my surgeon at the time, you know, when is she going to be able to do this? And my surgeon had said, oh, we'll cross that bridge when she's about 16 or so. And mum and dad were like, she's 4 and she's asking for this. She's not getting to 16 in nappies. But, you know, it was very much a case of delay. And if I think of something else that we can try, we'll put her back in the operating table and then we'll see how it goes. And it just felt like every time it was just getting worse. So,
well, it's a no wonder you developed anxiety around surgery when that was your experience with it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, because if it was a case of, if I was, every time I was going in, if mum and dad were able to say, when you come out you'll be better and you won't have a bad tummy anymore and you won't see your bladder, like small things like that, I think would have made a huge impact. But obviously, yeah, every time I was coming in for surgery, I was coming out feeling more unwell, horrible long hospital stays. Similar to you, my surgeon wasn't very friendly. His answers weren't supportive. I'd be saying to him, how long do I have to be in here? And his response would be, how long is a piece of string? You can't.
What?
Yeah, and it was very much like that. And, when he came in, it was all, there was like a tension. It felt like he was this like God kind of creature. And he didn't have that approachability that my surgeon that did all my amazing surgery on me ended up having. But it was that way, like you'd feel uncomfortable asking any questions, and then when you did, it would be, how long is a piece of string? And he'd never really acknowledge me either. He'd always speak to my parents. He'd come in and I was the patient. We don't address the patient, we address the parents. But I have a lot of questions as well, and you'll know that from your experiences. Your parents have the medical questions that probably need answered, but as a patient and as a child, you want to know, what's your life going to be like? When can you go back out and play with your friends? When are you going to be out of nappies? And I never really had that option to ask him those things, and I think that's where I really struggled. So yeah, anaesthetic and surgery is just properly anxiety inducing for me now.
Yeah, I can see
which
why.
is tough. Yeah.
Did you have like an open line of communication with your parents then regarding everything? Like, were they open to answering your questions to the best of their ability?
Yeah, kind of. So I always grew up knowing that I had bladder exstrophy. And I can't remember when it really clicked for me that I was like, oh, that was weird that I was born with my bladder outside my body. But I always knew I was different. I always knew I had to be careful with my stomach. I have 2 older brothers who also were told, you can't play rough and tumble with Kirsteen the way that you would with yourselves. And because where I grew up, it was a fairly small place, so everybody knew everybody. And my mum and dad decided to be really open and honest and transparent that I had been born with my bladder outside my body. They weren't expecting it. They didn't know what it was going to be. But the reason that they had wanted to do that was because in a small place, the rumour mill just goes mental. So they were like, we don't want it to come out that she was born with 2 heads, or
she's ridiculous.
Yeah, just something mad. And they were like, and the way they saw it, and I think this has kind of made me the person I am today, was if any of our friends don't accept it, then they're not our friends anymore, because she's our daughter and we're there for her. And I think from that, and from my mum and dad being so open, I just everybody just knew about me. So, it was never a secret. So all my school friends and stuff knew. And I think off the back of that, we did have that open line of communication. But when I was scheduled to go to the hospital in London that did end up treating me, they didn't tell me until about 2 or 3 weeks before the surgery, because they knew it would be 2 or 3 weeks of me saying, I'm not going, I'm not doing it. It's not happening. And, every excuse under the sun. I feel better now.
Right.
You don't feel better now. I'm like, no, I didn't. I quite enjoy having this external stoma. It makes me different. And who needs a belly button? And I like nappies. So there was a lot of kind of compromise. So they wouldn't tell me when I needed to go for surgery until they felt like they absolutely had to. And looking back, I don't think they told me how unwell I actually was.
Yeah.
At points. So how was it with you? Did you feel like your parents were quite open with you, or?
Yeah, she was really open. I mean, I think definitely like the language around it, grew more mature the older I got, and I could ask her questions like in hindsight of like, how is this actually compared to how I thought it was? And she's always been honest about answering it. But she was always good about like, if I had questions that I wanted to ask the doctor, she would, have me write out a list of questions ahead of time and things like that. But yeah, I always knew I was different. And I think, like close friends knew Not everyone at school knew. We weren't from as small as a town as you are. We were still from a fairly small-ish town where a lot of people do know, like everybody else.
Yeah.
Can't help going to the grocery store without running into someone, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like not the whole class would know that like I had something, but like my close friends would, teachers would know, because of course they would have to be okay with me just, getting up and going to the bathroom if I needed to go. And change of clothes like in the cubby or my backpack or whatever in case there's a problem at school, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's important though, and I always say that now to parents who will reach out to me, if they find out during pregnancy or when their children are born. I always say, just be open about it, just be honest. And I don't think it would have done me any good for my mum and dad to let me think that I was normal, for lack of a better word, to then get older and realise actually what I went through wasn't normal. Because I always think they could have really easily just said to me, it's different for you because you're a girl. Because I had 2 brothers, so maybe I wouldn't have thought, well, I have to deal with this because I'm not a boy. So I always say to parents of children now with bladder exstrophy, be honest with them. And on the days that you feel rubbish, like there would be times where I would cry and, I would cry and, why me? And I don't want this anymore. And it would sometimes just come out of nowhere. I'd maybe just have a bad night and just got upset. And what I always really liked was my mum and dad would go, yeah, this really sucks. Let's be upset about this together. They were never like, oh, everything happens for a reason and you're lucky that like, I always say when your child is sad, be sad with them, because that's sometimes what you need, isn't it? You need your parents to go, do you know what? I know that you're hurting. I'm hurting as well for you. Let's just have a night where we feel sorry for ourselves. And then tomorrow we'll pick ourselves back up.
Yeah.
And we'll get on with it. Yeah. And I think I've always kind of seen it like that. I don't know if that's how they meant to do it. I don't know if it just came naturally, but that's how I always felt. Like I could have a night where it was just rubbish. And the next day they wouldn't bring it up with me. They wouldn't say, how are you feeling about everything now? They would gauge it on how I would wake up. If I woke up normal, they'd just be like, okay, she's had her cry. That's it.
Yeah.
We'll move on with it. And I always really appreciated that, because I don't know how I would have dealt with it as a parent if I'd never had that kind of example.
Yeah. So I really love that a lot.
Yeah, just be sad with people. Sometimes that's what you need. You need if you're crying, you need somebody to cry with you and go, that's really rubbish what you've just been through. Or it shouldn't have been you. It should never have been you. You didn't deserve this. You sometimes need that. It doesn't always help to go, oh, but you're strong, you'll get through this. Right. Sometimes you don't need that, because then I think it makes you feel like you have to be strong.
Yeah, well, or think I am freaking strong. I'm still allowed to cry about it.
Yeah, exactly. Of course I'm strong, but I'm going to cry because I'm strong and I've survived this. You know what I mean? And I think I've always thought that kind of openness to be vulnerable has been a really good thing for me. And I can still do it. I can still phone my mum and be like, I'm feeling really rubbish today. Why has this happened to me? And she'll go, yeah, it should never have happened to you. I feel rubbish every day when I think about it. And it doesn't then make me feel bad thinking my mum's at home every day feeling rubbish because she had a daughter that's born with bladder exstrophy. But it makes me feel like I can phone her and we can just rant together about it. And it's not a common occurrence, don't get me wrong. It's not every month or whatever. It could be years, you know, that go by. But it's just nice knowing that you have that, I think. Yeah,
no, definitely. I have that with my mom too.
It feels so good. And I think it'll make your mum feel better as well. Because, I think as you get older as well, your relationships with your parents change, don't they? So probably for a long time, your mum did have to be the strong one for you in the hospital. Whereas now, and even, listening to the podcast, she's quite open and honest about concerns that she had when you had to be away from home for a long time. And that maybe feels like a bit of a weight of the world is lifted off her shoulders, because she's kind of saying, it was really hard for me, but I did it for you. And I think that's quite a nice part of a relationship, I think, that you can have with your parents or with your children if they have exstrophy or another illness, to be able to, when they get older, reminisce, and because you have that shared experience, but it's not the exact same. It's a shared experience from two different angles.
Yeah, definitely.
So
Did your parents know that you were going to have bladder exstrophy ahead of time? Yeah, mine
No.
didn't.
No idea. So funnily enough though, when my mum was pregnant, she had said to my dad, there's something wrong with this one. Like, this doesn't feel the same.
Oh, wow.
And dad had said maybe it's because it's a girl, because, you know, they always say, you know, your pregnancy symptoms and everything are different. And she had all the tests under the sun that came back totally normal. And I think it got to the point that my dad was getting quite angry with my mum, because he was going, like, I'm not excited about having my daughter because you're just having me all anxious. And so my mum had some issues with her, difficulties with her 2 past labours. So she'd had a C-section. So she was scheduled to have a C-section with me. And so many people don't believe this story, but my dad, hand on heart, says it's true. So the night before my mum was due to have her C-section, he was staying at my nana's house with my 2 brothers, and he was watching TV, and there was a TV show about a birth defect that caused children to be born with their organs on the outside of their bodies. And the surgeon who ended up operating on me was talking on the show. And he said it was extremely graphic. My 2 brothers were in the room, and he turned it off because he thought, I'm not watching this before my daughter's born. You know, little did he know.
Gosh.
And then after I was born, so previously he got to be there when my 2 brothers were being cleaned up and everything after they'd been born. And then when it had been me, they've pushed him away and said, can you go and sit down? And my dad had just thought maybe they've changed the procedures. It's been about 18 months. And then within a few minutes, they came back out and they said, you know, we think there's a problem. We think we can see your daughter's bladder. And I think at that point, their worlds just kind of shattered. So how was it with you then when your mum found out? Was
it was kind of the same. She didn't know there was anything wrong. They had like all of the tests done and everything came back saying that I was going to be totally normal. And then, when it came to the day of, like, they didn't even really tell her anything. I came out and they just like grabbed my dad and left the room with me.
Wow.
Yeah. So my mom was just kind of sitting there in the room with my grandma and her sister being like, what's happening?
And how did they tell your mum and dad in the end? Do your parents remember how they kind of found out from the medical professionals?
I don't really know how they told my mom. She said she was just so out of it from everything. Yeah, I can't remember. They just came back and oh, that's what happened. They didn't know it was my bladder.
Wow. Okay.
My bladder was inside out.
Yeah.
And so they didn't recognize it for what it was.
Right.
And
okay.
So, a nurse like opened a door and she could see into the other room for a second. And like my dad and the doctor were standing there with like a textbook open and like flipping through it, trying to figure out what was wrong. And that's when she was like, oh, something's wrong with my child.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. What a way to find out.
Yeah, not the best communication on their part, I think.
No. I mean,
could have definitely been handled better.
100%. I mean, when my mum and dad were told, so my original surgeon at the time had come out after dad had been told to go and sit down, was basically told that of any condition that was fixable surgically, that exstrophy was the most complicated to fix surgically. And he then proceeded to tell them that I would never be continent, I would never have a functioning bladder, and I had no chance at a normal life. And this was all within an hour of me being born. So
wow.
Just think, I know. That must have been so tough. I know. It's just, when you think about it now, like, I just don't think that would happen now.
No, it wouldn't. No.
So tough.
That's insane. Yeah. Wow. So what was it like to have your bladder on the outside for a little while? Like, do you remember having to take care of it or like?
Yeah. So basically, because it was on the outside, it was constantly kind of like seeping, for risk of being quite graphic. So mum and dad had those gauze sort of squares, you know, with the KY jelly, and they always needed to have that over my bladder just to keep it moisturized and also to protect the the skin around it. And I don't know if it's one of those things that I've just dreamt it and I think it happened, or if it did happen, but I remember so vividly at one point thinking that's my bladder and touching it and it being really sore. But I don't know if it was just something that I've dreamt, or because, I was 4 when they put it back inside. So right. I think, would you remember that? But it's one of those things you just remember so vividly in your mind that, touched my bladder and it was really painful. And it's not a memory that a lot of people can have.
Yeah.
So no, I don't remember loads about that. What I do remember about the external stoma was tough.
Yeah.
Because you had to be obviously really, really, really careful with it. And similarly, you kind of had to have gauze over it to protect the skin around it. And I've got quite naturally sensitive skin anyway. So I hated that. I hated having the stoma. And I think the reason for that was because not even mum and dad knew if it was going to be any better from that. And I do remember thinking, I can't live with this because, you look, it's not a problem to look different, but you're conscious that you do.
Right.
And I think I struggled a lot with that.
Yeah. Were you weren't ever teased or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I was. Yeah, quite badly. And again, it's one of those things that stick. You'll know how it is. You'll have certain moments, either in hospital or whatever, that will just stick in your mind as if it was 10 minutes ago. And I remember I was in class in school, in primary school, and I must have been very young, about 5 or 6. And I was standing up and I was reading the blackboard. And for some reason, I don't know why, but I must have just been focusing really hard. And I just lifted up my skirt a wee bit. And somebody had went, "Is Kirsteen wearing nappies?" And then everybody turned around and they were like, "Oh my God, why are you wearing nappies?" And then there was obviously quite a few nasty comments. And there was a couple of kids in school that my mum and dad actually had to go in and say, "We don't want them to be near Kirsteen when she comes back from the hospital," because one of them actually actively kicked me in the stomach after being told not to kick. After being told you need to watch her stomach, one of them actively kicked me in the stomach. So mum was like, "She's just been through major surgery in London. When she comes back to the school, we don't want them to be near her." So yeah, horrible. What about you? How was it in school?
Wow,
for you?
Not as bad as that. I'll say that. Yeah, not as bad as that. I mean, I didn't have anything external like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't allowed to wear pants for a long time. I could only wear skirts for easy access and stuff. But, and I got made fun of that for a lot. Just more of the general, boys teasing girls because they can see up their skirts and stuff. But a lot of that because it was all I could wear.
Yeah.
I remember in 2nd and 3rd grade getting chased around the parking lot and made fun of because I had trouble with staying dry and stuff and with continence, and they would just make fun of me for basically having accidents at school and stuff, but not nearly as bad as being kicked in the stomach. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, that was a really extreme example. Unfortunately, it did only happen once, but I think at that point, mum and dad had said she's been through so much surgery to get where she is now that a blow to the stomach could just totally set her back, and we can't go through it again. I couldn't go through it again. I don't think mum and dad could have mentally gone through it again. You know, so yeah, it was tough. And I remember it, honestly, it could have been 10 minutes ago from the way you remember it, just even just the pain and thinking of oh my days, I don't know what this is going to do. And obviously you'll know that with bladder exstrophy, you don't have all your muscles. So your bladder is a lot closer to the surface, which means that it's much easier to rupture and burst. And I remember for a long time worrying that kick in the stomach would have meant that my bladder would have burst. Fortunately, it didn't.
Yeah.
But it's just, I remember thinking that, and I know that mum and dad had the same thoughts, but it was a case of just keeping a really close eye on me and making sure that when I was catheterizing, everything was okay. But yeah, do you ever look back though and think, I don't know how I would deal with this as a parent? Do you ever see what your mum did and what you went through and think, I don't know how I would handle that if that was my kids?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, I ask my mom frequently, like, even still after talking to her and hearing how she dealt with things, like, I still just go back and ask her, like, how did you know to handle it like that? How did that come to you to handle it that way? Because with no training and, no expertise anywhere.
I know. And and again, that kind of lack of support and understanding.
Yeah.
I always look back and think, I don't know how you did it.
Yeah.
I don't, they handled it so well, but I just don't think I would have it in me to handle it the same way. I don't know. It's a strange one though, isn't it? Like, as you get older, you start to put yourself more in your parents' shoes. Because it feels like so long ago for me. Like, I'll look back and stuff, and like if I like rewatch any speeches or anything that I've made about what I've been through, I just feel like I'm watching somebody else's story. And it doesn't help that, you're probably on painkillers and stuff, so you don't always feel like yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, especially like looking forward. I mean, you're married and I have a steady partner, and like looking forward to the future. Like, if we have kids, like, it's statistically speaking more likely that our kids are going to have bladder exstrophy. And so we're literally going to put ourselves in our parents' shoes.
Yeah.
So, it makes you think, like, gosh, how would I handle that?
And it makes you think you would probably go to your parents for advice.
Oh, hell yeah.
On how they handle it, which is crazy because you would think you would know as the extrophy patient. But what a lot of people don't realise, because I've said the same, what people don't realise is I never made the decisions. Yeah. And it's the same for you. You were in the bed. Your mum was making the difficult decisions. She was having probably the difficult conversations and the scary answers and everything. We were just there dealing with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're a kid. Somebody comes and tells you, okay, this is happening. You'll question it. You'll question it and go, I don't want to because it'll hurt. And then you're a bit of a drama queen. And then you handle it. And I think, because that's crossed my mind as well. If we go on to have a family and if they did have extrophy, because I don't know about your mum, but my parents had quite a lot of sort of feelings of blaming themselves. Looking back on, what did she do during this pregnancy that was different with my brothers? Did she eat something funny? And she still deals with that. And I always say to her, I've never once looked at you and Dad and thought, whose fault is it? Yeah. But I've had a few people saying to me, would you not feel guilty if you were to have a child with bladder exstrophy? Knowing the child. And I always think, well, no, because my life is amazing. And I actually think it's because I've had bladder exstrophy that I am where I am now.
Oh, yeah.
And I've had a few really insulting questions like that, though. And I don't know how you would answer that if somebody was to say to you, oh, you and your partner are thinking of a child. Do you not think that's quite selfish? It's just like, no. And if you think that, it's because you don't understand extrophy,
Or what it's like to just have any kind of birth defect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that just means you don't you don't have the capability of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And I mean,
it leaves you speechless, doesn't it?
it really does. I'm trying to think of what to say.
I remember the first time I was asked that, and I was told, you could just adopt. And I was like, that's a very... and I'd met this person. I should also clarify, I'd known this person for a few hours. It wasn't a close friend. It wasn't a relative. It was just somebody who had said, have you not thought about just adopting and then reducing that risk? It's like, well, it's a personal choice. And I just don't think it's fair to lay that blame, because, I know how that blame has affected my mum, even though she knows it's not her fault. Or, even though it's definitely not her fault, and there's been no proof to say otherwise, as far as I know.
Well, studies so far have shown that there's nothing that the parents do during pregnancy that cause it. It's just something that happens developmentally in like the second trimester, I think.
Yeah.
Is what I read.
It's to do with basically the bones are failing to kind of form together the way that they should.
Yeah, but the point is that it's just a developmental issue that has nothing to do with external forces from the parents and how they're handling pregnancy.
100%.
Definitely not your mom's fault. Definitely not my mom's fault. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I say that to parents as well, that, you know, it's not your fault, because they say, is it something I did? Did I eat something? Or you'll have parents who'll say, you know, I never smoked or drank during the pregnancy and I ate healthy. And it's like, you could have literally done everything textbook perfect. You could have had 12 hours sleep a night. You could have eaten everything organic. You could have done everything amazingly. It wouldn't have changed whether or not your kid was born with exstrophy. So yeah, that was always, and I think that's kind of the biggest thing for my mum still, is she probably still lies awake at night and thinks, you know, what did I do? Which is a shame. So yeah, it's, you know, for us, it's that way of, if we have kids, that there's a higher chance, but again, it wouldn't be our fault. It's not our fault we were born with bladder exstrophy, is it? So if we choose to have a kid, it's not our fault if they get it as well. Yeah, there's a higher chance, but that's the case with so many things.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so, and I've never seen bladder exstrophy as being a life-limiting condition. I don't know about you, but I've never felt held back, you know, to a huge extent. Obviously, there's some things that you wish you could do when you were younger that maybe you couldn't, but I've never felt like if I had a kid that had bladder exstrophy, I'd feel like they weren't going to get to experience all the amazing things that life has to offer. I sometimes think you've got more options. You know, you meet more people.
I agree with that. I think there's nothing that it held me back from doing. I always still just, I found it like as a reason to go do what I wanted to do. I always felt like it was a motivating factor to push me to actually accomplish things that I wanted to do with my life, you know?
Yeah. And it does, because you end up in situations that you wouldn't probably have ended up in otherwise. You know, even like this, we would never have known each other existed. You wouldn't have had your podcast. You wouldn't have got to meet all these, you know, all the amazing people. And it's just like, yeah, you know, things would maybe be different. You might have less concerns around your health and whatever, and maybe your childhood would be less filled with memories of being in hospital and more of being in parks. But I feel like it shapes you, who you are as a person. And there's so many people that I know with bladder exstrophy that always say that they're only there because of the experiences they've had. They've wanted to meet people, they've wanted to go out and help others. And if they didn't have bladder exstrophy, they don't know what they would have ended up doing. Maybe they've ended up in the same thing, but you never know.
Yeah, I think it definitely shapes and brings out the compassion that we all have.
Yeah. And I think you grow up a bit faster as well.
Yeah.
I think, you end up in quite scary and adult situations quite a bit faster. And I think for me, I was aware of what kind of dying was, when like you realise that quite early on, that life isn't forever. And I think some of that is quite sad when you look back and you think, I was really young when I picked up on that stuff. But then, like you say, it brings out that compassionate side in you. And I think it brings out that side in people, where you're like, just do what you want, because life isn't forever. Go out and do what you want to do and what makes you happy. And that all sounds like ideal. And obviously it's not always the case. I'm not saying I'm just away out doing whatever I fancy all the time. But I think, when you're young, when you're younger, you grow up a bit faster. And I think, you maybe consider things in a different way to what other people who haven't dealt. And that's not just a bladder exstrophy thing. That's if you've been a child in hospital thing.
Yes.
Or if you've maybe cared for somebody who's had health issues, there are situations where you grow up faster. And I think that was probably a benefit for me. Looking back, I would say it was.
Yeah. I mean, from what I know of your story, yeah.
I don't know what job I would be doing, honestly. So now obviously I'm a fundraiser because I just feel like I've done it all my life. And now I look back, I think, I don't know what I would be doing if I didn't have bladder, because I would never have fundraised for the hospital that I fundraised for.
Right.
So I would never have been to events. I would have never known that. You never know, because life could have ended up in a really similar situation. But I'm definitely where I am now because of the experiences that I had when I was younger. So I honestly, and I will say this to everybody, and don't know how many people believe me, but I wouldn't change it. I don't know about you, but if somebody was to say to me tomorrow, we can cure you of this, and you'll never have to think about it again, I would probably take the cure, but I wouldn't have told them turn back time and stop me from having it.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. I mean, because I've had people ask, like, do you ever wish that you were born without bladder exstrophy? And no, I wouldn't trade my experience at all.
No, there's some things that I feel I don't know, maybe it's because I'm married as well now, but there's also that option, the concern of some people with bladder exstrophy can struggle to conceive, and that pregnancies can sometimes be a lot more difficult. So I sometimes deal with a bit of guilt around, now my husband has to deal with that.
Yeah, I have that too.
And I feel, I've always said that's why I would never want that to be our next step, to say to have children, because I would never want to then find out that I can't, or whatever. So I feel guilt actually around how it affects people around me, probably more so my husband, not at the moment, but because you feel like that affects the people that you love, don't you?
Oh yes.
So that's the only thing I would definitely change, would be give me everything else you've given me with it, like the bladder spasms, the having to catheterize, the bladder stones, the surgeries, but just let me know it's easy to have a child.
Yeah.
Just tell me that'll be fine and the pregnancy will be pain-free. And lots of people with bladder exstrophy have had children, and they've had healthy pregnancies and whatever. But that for me, I think, is my biggest gripe now with having it, is that kind of, it's a bit of a dark cloud over your head sometimes. And you'll probably feel the same if you're in a long-term relationship. It's when are you having a family?
Yeah.
Have you not thought about having kids yet? You're not getting any younger and all the rest of it. And it's
yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, you don't know the situation and you don't want to get into it because it's not anybody else's business. And potentially it's always a question that women seem to get more so than men. I've never heard anybody saying to my husband, if you're not thought about having children, you're not getting any younger.
Yeah.
That's like,
that's true.
So that's the only thing. If I'm being perfectly honest, that is the only thing I would change. Would be that issue.
I can agree with that. Yeah. Because that has been a worry that I've had in my mind for a while too. I mean, we've been together for like 4, almost 5 years. So, at some point things are going to go that way. And we've talked about like wanting kids and stuff. And it's definitely something that's been on my mind as well, that it's going to be hard.
Yeah. And that's it. And, even if you knew, I think for me, even if I knew that the pregnancy was going to be 9 months of, quite a difficult time, I think I could cope with it. I think it's the not knowing.
Yeah.
Whether or not you can. And I mean, again, we're not the only ones that go through it. There's lots of people for various medical reasons that have the same concerns. And often women who have no medical history have the same problems. But I feel like that's the thing that bladder exstrophy just kind of keeps throwing at women. Until you have a child, they're like, you're absolutely fine, you're not in pain, you've not had stones, but can you get pregnant? And it's like, I still have that one to throw at you, and you're like, oh, I know. So yeah, that's definitely the only thing I'm like, that really sticks.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Body Talk with Becks. Also, just the first part of my interview with Kirsteen Lupton. Join me back again next week for the second half and conclusion of our conversation. I hope you found it informative and enjoyable. If you did, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. And if you're interested in sharing your story or know someone who does, please feel free to reach out to me either on my website, www.bodytalkwithbecks.com, or you can find me on social media at bodytalkwithbecks. Welcome back to Body Talk with Becks. This week is the second half of my conversation with Kirsteen, all the way over in Scotland, and I really enjoyed both parts of this conversation. I think I learned a lot about the health system over there and about how bladder exstrophy patients really can be born with the same birth defect, but it can affect our lives so differently. So I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I did.
Kind of jumping off of that track a little bit based off of something that you said. I didn't have really bladder stones or spasms. I only had bladder spasms like after surgeries and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So you've mentioned them a couple times now. I assume they were more common for you?
Yeah. So even still, I'll really randomly get a bladder spasm. So I don't know how it is with you, but my parents were initially told that I'll never have any feeling in my bladder at all. And then the first time I had a full bladder, I remember I was in so much pain and I was like crippled over, and they were like, what's wrong? What can we do for you? And I think I'd eventually said, like, should I try and empty my bladder? And I was in the hospital at the time. I think I was an outpatient. And I said, should I try and empty my bladder? And they'd said, well, you can't feel your bladder, but you can give it a bash if you want. And then I did. They got me a catheter in it and I felt better. And everybody was like, you shouldn't feel that, So that's when they realised, okay, she's got a sensation in her bladder, which really surprised everybody, because they always said that was another risk of having bladder problems, is you'd drink a lot of stuff and you'd never know you needed to pee. But I do. So I started, and I don't even know how to explain them. It's literally just like, imagine just somebody just squeezing your bladder, or like nails. Know how you get pins and needles? Yeah. It's like that, but it's in your bladder. And they can sometimes be a couple of seconds and stop you in your tracks, or they can be a bit longer. And for me, they got worse when I had bladder stones. So I've only ever had bladder stones twice in my life. And each time they were big enough that they needed to do a general anaesthetic to get them out.
Oh my gosh. Again,
because if you catheterize, you can't really pass them naturally because of how the catheter is, because it's so small and everything like that. Right. But that was pretty painful stuff, and that was stop you in your tracks pain. You couldn't stand up, you couldn't lie down, you couldn't sort of do anything. And there are things that you can do, I think, to prevent it from happening, in terms of like irrigating your bladder. So obviously putting sterile water into a syringe and then putting the syringe into your bladder. But even for me, I find that quite painful. So to be honest, I should do it more, and I don't do it enough. But yeah, I've been quite unlucky with that, and I don't know how it is for you, but I get quite frequent UTIs, so urinary tract infections, which I find really, they can be quite painful as well. I've been fortunate actually this year, I've not had many, but when you get a UTI, I mean, you've got a UTI, don't you?
Oh yeah. It's like instantaneous. I know it before like even the symptoms really hit in full flow. Like,
yes,
you can just kind of tell like, oh, I'm going to call my doctor. I should get the medication going, the whole process to get the pharmacy to fill it. Yeah. Because by the time I feel symptoms, it's going to be really bad.
I know. You just get this kind of sudden twinge, don't you? And you're like, oh, okay.
There's like a sudden ache and you're like, oh, that's not in a good spot.
Yeah, you're like, did I sleep funny, or is this another infection? Yeah, I'm like that with my doctor. I'll just phone them, and I'm quite lucky now because my GP will just be like, if you say you have one, you have one. I'll prescribe you antibiotics.
Mine too.
Yeah, it's not a case of, bring in a sample and we'll test it. It's just, if you say you have one, you have one.
Yeah. He still has me bring in a sample because sometimes I get like really weird strains of the infection. And so like sometimes she'll need to like prescribe me like a certain type of medication. So she still has me bring in a sample, but she usually gets me started on something at least. And then that way, when she has time to actually culture it, if she has to change it, at least I've already gotten on something. And
yeah, so if it's not making a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe a bit of a placebo thing as well, isn't it? Even if it's not totally fixing the infection, you feel like there's kind of something in there really fighting it off.
Yeah, well, and sometimes it like will ward off the symptoms so that like I feel better, even though it's not attacking like the actual infection. It's like attacking the symptoms.
Yeah.
And then the different medication that's actually for the strain will then attack, of course, the strain and make it go away. But
that's quite interesting. I've been fairly fortunate in that the same antibiotic tends to work.
I've had so many different strains of infection. It's ridiculous. I've had so many different kinds of medications. There was one, I was having UTIs so regularly that my body built up a defense against it, and we like can't even use it anymore.
Oh my goodness. Oh no.
Yeah. That was when I was 11.
Was it just because you were always on the same one that your body was just like...
Yeah, nah. I think it was Zipro, I think.
I don't think I've heard of that one, actually.
Yeah, I had reoccurring UTIs every 2 weeks for an entire year when I was 11. And so,
my days.
Yeah, I would be like on medication for a week, and then I'd feel better and I'd run out of pills. And then within like 3 days, I would start feeling symptoms again. And so then I'd go back on the medication, and it was just that loop over and over again for like a whole year. And then my body built up, when you're on medication that long, the strain built up a defense against it. Yeah. So then we had to switch it up and try to figure out what would actually work. And
my God. That must have been quite scary as well, though, thinking, are you ever going to actually shift the infection?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was so young at the time, I didn't really realize like how bad it was. I was just like, oh, I feel crappy again. And like, I got really good at spotting like when I was getting sick again. And like my mom learned like what parts of my body to press to see if it was in the kidney or if it was like in my bladder this time. And she kind of like learned to ask certain questions like, does it feel like sparklers? Does it feel like a dull ache? Like,
wow. Oh my goodness. They just become medical professionals themselves, don't they, parents?
we do.
It is funny that. But yeah, I remember when I was younger, I was put on a regular, I think it was like a nightly dose of trimethoprim. And I think it was a very light one, antibiotic, but I think it was more to try and prevent UTIs from coming. But then I think something similar happened, which was because I'd had it for so long. I don't think my body had built a resistance up to it, but I think my new surgeon had basically said, listen, she's been on this for years. If she has an infection, trimethoprim's not going to touch it.
Yeah.
So they did stop that. So if they ever try to prescribe me that now, I'm like, I might not have that might just not touch the kind of the sides of it, so I have to ask for different ones. But you might be the same, but when they tell you you're getting a specific antibiotic and you have bad side effects and you think, oh no, not this one. And for me, it's always the antibiotic that gives me the worst side effects that they give me. And I just think, oh, what's worse? The side effects of the antibiotic are just like this infection run its course. And obviously you can't do that with an infection, but you do hear the antibiotic you're getting and your heart can sometimes sink a bit. You're like, oh,
yeah,
that one.
Definitely. I had one, my doctor had to prescribe me a medication. So I had a UTI like 6 years ago where my body basically built its own strain of UTI.
Wow.
And because she didn't know like what it was after studying it. And like the specialist I had been seeing, I put air quotes on that because she sucked. So I don't really know how much of a specialist she really was, but
right. Okay. I hear you.
But she kept prescribing me the same medication over and over and over again for the infection, but she never actually looked at my culture to see what the strain was. So she didn't even know if it would work. But she was having me come in and leave samples And it's like, so why aren't you looking at them? Why are you prescribing me the wrong medication? And it was an ongoing thing for like 3 or 4 weeks where I would finish the medication for 4 days, the 5 days and whatever. And then I'd call and be like, yeah, I still have an infection. She'd be like, okay, we'll come in and bring a sample. And so I would come in and bring a sample, and she'd prescribe the same medication. And I tried calling like several times and being like, so that medication didn't work. Why are we prescribing the same one? And I eventually called my general physician and explained what was happening. And she was like, all right, well, I'll get the test results from them for the culture. So basically, she made the culture actually happen.
Wow.
And she the strain and was like, I've never seen this before, but I think this really old medication from like the 80s will work on it. So,
my goodness.
Yeah. And then I had to wait 3 days for the pharmacy to fill it because they had to special order it from someplace. And it had some pretty gnarly side effects.
Oh no.
It knocked me on my butt.
Did it just make you feel nauseous and tired and
gross? It gave me crazy diarrhea for days.
Oh my goodness.
Not a fun medication to be on, but it kicked the infection.
That's what you need.
Yeah. Like I would rather go through like 3 days of not feeling good and have the infection kicked than have like 3 weeks of back and forth.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well, though, when you're younger, is learning that actually take this medicine, which is an antibiotic, it'll make you feel really bad for a couple of days, but then you'll be fine. Whereas if you let an infection linger, then one, the damage that it'll cause, or that it could cause, and two, you'll be sick for longer. And it took me a lot longer than it should have to realise that. That actually, I'll take the antibiotics and I'll suck it up for a couple of days. I used to always be like, no, I don't want antibiotics. I don't like them. They make me feel really bad. Totally ignoring the fact that I wasn't sleeping at night and my bladder was sore and my back was sore because my kidneys hurt. So yeah, but it's better than antibiotics. It's not.
It's not.
But it took me longer than it should have to really kind of realise that. And I was like, actually, I'm really sick for like a month before I do anything. Like, I'll just take the antibiotics and I'll be fine. But UTIs are a bit of a challenge. And the annoying thing is they are hard to avoid, especially, if you self-catheterize, they can be quite challenging. But actually in the UK, so you can phone your GP and you don't pay for prescriptions or anything in Scotland because it's under the NHS, so the GP will just prescribe you your antibiotic free of charge. But I had it like during a bank holiday, so I think everywhere was shut for a few days, and I remember I'd said to my husband, I was like, this one's going to be bad, I need to order antibiotics. So the pharmacy can prescribe them here as well, so you can phone a pharmacist and you can tell them your symptoms and they can generally prescribe them. So phone my pharmacist, and they had said, they'd said, are you seeing blood in your pee? And I'd said, well, I self-catheterize, so sometimes you can if your stoma's been a bit irritated and things. I went, so I've not. I went, but if I do, that's not necessarily signs of an infection. And they went, if you self-catheterize, we can't prescribe you antibiotics. And I was like, but surely, like, I'm the highest risk of having a UTI. And they went, you need to speak to your GP. And I was like, but they're closed and I'm in pain. Oh, we can't prescribe you. So I thought, that's fine, I'll try another pharmacy. So I went to which was a bit cheeky, I won't lie. But so I went to another pharmacy and I was like, I'm not going to say that I self-catheterize. So they'd said, why do you think you have a UTI? And I went, I've got pain in my lower back and my bladder hurts. And they said, well, if you're displaying symptoms, you need to go to your GP. And I was like, but why would I come for antibiotics if I wasn't displaying symptoms of a UTI? Like, what? And I just thought, this is infuriating. So I remember there was a couple of days of like intense waiting for I can't even remember why they were shut, but it was a couple of days of intense waiting of being like, I just want antibiotics. I'm being so dumbfounded by the fact that if you self-catheterize, it can't be prescribed for you. I just remember thinking, really? Yeah. I remember thinking, that's crazy. I mean, normally, like, our pharmacies and stuff are brilliant, but I remember when I came off the phone and had to tell that to my husband, he was like, are you sure that's what they said? Yeah, unfortunately. So yeah, that was a bit of a funny one / a massive frustration for me, because you think, who made that rule? The highest risk, let's not let them easily access the antibiotics. Like, really? I don't know. There'll be a reason for it somewhere, but I was too sore and annoyed to ask for it. I was like, okay, bye, and then hung up.
Well, maybe that's something we can look into changing.
Exactly. Yeah, we'll start a petition. We'll campaign for it in the UK.
I'll sign it.
Thank you very much. I have my first signature. Get it on social media. I'm sure I'll find somebody else. Maybe I was just really unlucky.
You just had someone who was not wanting to do their job that day. I don't know.
I know. I was like late on a Friday evening. They were probably like, no, that's a lot of paperwork. Yeah.
They were probably like, we're so close to being out of here. Friday night drinks.
Yeah. What time will she even come and pick it up?
Right.
I live round the corner. I'll be there in a minute if you just give me a prescription. So I was like, I'm not trying to just get drugs or something. Like, antibiotics. It's not anything.
You can't make anything out of that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what am I going to be doing? Selling like some weird UTI antibiotic?
I was just about to say, who would want to buy that? And then I realized others self-catheterizing.
Well, I was going to say other people who self-catheterize who are desperate for antibiotics. Just to side note that we do not recommend anybody to consider that. But yeah, I do remember being like, this is ridiculous, and then having to wait a few days to get them. So strange though, isn't it? Highest risk.
Yeah, that is
most difficult. I know.
So what are some current things that you still do for your bladder exstrophy? Like, what are some things that you still either like consistent maintenance or anything like that?
So obviously every day I have to use a catheter to void my bladder. So I have no control over my bladder apart from catheterizing. Generally we say every 4 hours, but as I kind of touched on earlier, I have feeling in my bladder. So if I don't feel like I need to go, I won't go. If I drink a lot, I'll go more often. So I do that. Obviously I should kind of irrigate my bladder more with sterile water, but I don't do it enough, and I should say I should do it more, but it's time consuming and it's painful. And there's still a little bit of that stubborn child in me that's like, I'm not doing it because it's uncomfortable. But I should do that. And generally speaking, it's just kind of like yearly checkups with my doctor. So just to get blood tests to check my kidneys are still okay, your ultrasound and your x-rays on your bladder and kidneys, just to check that they're all still okay. And then for the first time, at least that I remember, I had a cystoscopy last year. And they had originally wanted to put me under general anaesthetic for that, and I cried for about 3 nights straight because I didn't want to go to sleep. And then I had another thing I should say was I'd never met the surgeon that had wanted to put me to sleep to do it, and I was like, I don't trust, just based on past experience, not that I don't trust doctors, that's not correct at all, but you want to meet the doctor that's going to have you on the operating table, and I don't think that's a big ask. And so I'd said, can she phone me? I just want to talk to her. So bless her heart, she phoned me, and I'd said, I've never had this done before. I don't know why you want it, and I am terrified of general anaesthetics, like to the point that if you were to tell me now I had to get one, I'd burst into tears. And then she said to me, what size of catheter do you use? So that's obviously to determine the size of the channel from my trough and off into the bladder. Right. So I told her what size I used, and she went, you could be awake for that. So I was like, I'll come in tomorrow if I can be awake. And it was all fine. So I went in and I had that done, and it's to be a yearly thing. But I remember walking in, because it's still in an operating room, and I remember walking in and thinking, maybe I should have gone to sleep for this. It's like, this is scary.
So for your cystoscopy, they went through the metrophenol.
Yes. Yeah.
So lucky.
Do they not do it that way for you?
Well, no. So I actually had my metrophenol removed when I was 18.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they shove a tube up where you normally would go pee from.
Oh my goodness.
But I have like a crap ton of scar tissue from, of course, multiple surgeries and everything like that. And so it's super painful and it is not a fun experience. So general anesthetic, yes, please, for that.
Yeah, I think, oh my goodness.
They just wanted to put, last time they tried to do one, they just put some numbing cream on it and that's it. And then,
my goodness.
Of course, because our bodies are so different, like the channel is at a different angle than the doctor was used to. And so she messed up. Not messed up, but she didn't know. So she stuck the tube in and it didn't work. And she pulled it back out and had to start over like 2 times. But at a certain point, she also like scraped all of the numbing agent off. And so it wasn't doing anything anymore. And it's so painful.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah. I mean, I'd probably...
through the Mitrofanoff, hell yes.
I mean, yeah. And you know what? It was fine. It was a bit uncomfortable, but it was uncomfortable because they were like turning the camera and doing whatever they need to do. But I will say that for the doctors and nurses that were in the room, like they absolutely smashed it. They kept my mind off it completely. They were like, do you want to talk about it or do you want to talk about something else? Because we can talk about what we're seeing on the camera or we can talk about something completely different. And I'm normally like, I was just like, yeah, talk me through it. What are you seeing? What are you looking for? But the way they did it, they were just so good at not making it feel like a medical procedure that I was really grateful actually for them. And, you know, I get anxious around new doctors just based on past experiences and whatever, but they were like amazing. So when I came out, I felt okay, but they do a bit of a local anesthetic cream on the camera. And I remember thinking, I don't know why, I think I've been a bit daft, but when they said local anesthetic, I thought they just meant they would numb me from like the waist down and I wouldn't feel it. Right. So into the room, I was like, I've not had my local anesthetic. And like the nurse was clearly trying not to laugh. And she was like, oh, you know, well, we just put that in the camera. And I was like, oops. Oh. And I walked in and I was like, I should have definitely been asleep for this. But it was fine. So that's the maintenance for me. It really doesn't affect my life at all. And I know I'm fortunate because I know that there are a few people who have different things. But what about you? What kind of maintenance are you having to do?
Kind of similar to you. I do blood work every year, sometimes twice a year to check kidneys. And I was diagnosed with stage 1 kidney disease 6 years ago. So we kind of just monitor that to see how it's going. I started working with a nutritionist this last year to make sure I'm eating foods that are good for my kidneys and avoiding things that are damaging to kind of like help with that. Mm-hmm. And I do ultrasounds like I think every other year to check on it. They also check on my kidneys because I had a scar on one of my kidneys from a really bad infection that I had. And so they just check on the health, make sure it's healing properly and that kind of thing. So lots of similar, just maintenance, making sure everything's going to be okay for the future. Nothing's getting worse, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Somebody I know actually referred to it as an MOT. And it's so true, isn't it? It's just, I don't know if that's what it's called in America, actually.
Oh, what?
An MOT? It's like, I feel like I'm opening up your eyes to... So basically every year in the UK, like you have to get your car taken to have its MOT, and it basically just checks everything in the car and makes sure that it's still safe to drive. I don't know if you do that. Do you not have that in America? No?
Well, I mean, we used to have to get our smog checked like every so often.
No, it's not like that. It's basically just like an annual health check of your car, but it's a legal requirement as well. And I'm sure, it's every year. I'm saying this, my husband deals with all of that. So I'm like, but so it's basically just an annual health check to make sure that your car is still fit for purpose. And that's how I see it with Bladder Exstrophy. You've got an annual health check just to make sure that your body is still functioning. Yeah. I try to stay on top of it. I don't know about what your guys' system is there, but the health system I have here, it has like your
oh my gosh, I'm blanking out on words right now. I'm sorry. Like your patient portal has like your checklist of stuff that's coming up. So like if you need to have your blood work done every year, it'll pop up with like, oh, you had your blood work done 11 months ago. You should schedule your blood work next month or whatever.
Oh, nice.
So I usually check that and try to stay on top of it. And my doctor always thinks it's funny when I come in because she's like, nobody else is so on top of like coming in every year, making sure everything's checked. Well, if I don't, something's going to go wrong.
Yeah. And it would be typical, like the first time that you think, I'm okay, I'll give this one a miss, then you'll get sick. Oh, that's funny. We don't have anything like that here. We just kind of get like an appointment out from the NHS to say that you're scheduled in to be seen at a certain time. Generally, if you don't hear from them, you can maybe phone up and just check, but it's quite good that way because you're just always on the system. So I think however it works is it gets to a year and they fire you out a letter and they put an appointment in place for you. So I don't know what one would be better, if it's better to be in control and to be able to be like, this is when I need my bloods done. Because sometimes a lot of time will go by and I'll be like, has it been more than a year since my last ultrasound? I can't remember. But yeah, it's not too high maintenance really then for either of us, is it?
Yeah, luckily.
Yeah. Yeah, we are fortunate, I think, with that. At least because you hear of other individuals who maybe do have it, they've had different procedures or whatever. Yeah. And like I always kind of say that when I speak to parents of people with bladder exstrophy, is like no case is the same. There's lots of similar experiences, and we've lots of similar experiences, but if you really got down to the nitty-gritty of the actual medical terms and things like that, it's probably loads of differences. And outcomes and whatever, and I always kind of say that to extra parents, like not to scare them, to be like, it might not be as easy, it wasn't easy, but it might not be as simple when they get older as it is for me, but also you'll be hearing a lot of horror stories right now, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be like that. Everyone is different.
Yeah. And it's not all going to be bad.
No, and it's really not. And there's the honesty of being like, there's going to be some really bad times. But like we've said before, I think that shapes you, as a person. And I don't know if you ever do this, but you kind of look back and go, oh my God, I've actually come through a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You feel awesome, don't you? You're like, wow, I did that. Not I did that like myself, because obviously we both had support, but you just look back and think, God, we've done a lot.
Yeah, been through a lot and came out the other side.
Yeah, and both, with a kind of positive perspective and like a good outlook on life. We've had some hard hands dealt to us, but it is what it is. So yeah, I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything either. So, do you want to tell us about how you got into fundraising?
Yes.
Because it's related to bladder exstrophy. So
it is, yes. So when I went to the hospital down in London, it's called Great Ormond Street Hospital. And that was where the kind of specialist surgeon was. So when I went in there, I was 6, and that was when I had like my big life-changing surgery. And I remember walking in and being terrified because I was getting a general anaesthetic. But one thing that had really surprised me was when you went into that hospital, it didn't feel like a hospital. Like, one, it didn't smell, and you'll know what I mean when I say that. It didn't smell like a hospital. And that was weird. And that was the first thing I remember thinking, was it doesn't smell like a hospital. The second thing I remember thinking was, all these kids are happy and smiling. All of them. They were, the patients were playing with their brothers and sisters. And I remember thinking, what's going on here? So I was instantly, I wouldn't say impressed, because I was 6. I don't know if a 6-year-old can be impressed by something, but it had an impact on me, if you like. And then, so basically, I got up to the ward, and I was placed in a bed next to a little boy called Alex. and he was being treated for cancer at the time. He was going through cancer treatment. So it was different illnesses and obviously different surgeries and things like that. But if you're a sick kid in hospital, you're next to another sick kid. You start talking, don't you? And again, you don't care when you're a kid. We weren't going to be like, you've not got bladder exstrophy, and he wasn't going to say, you're not getting cancer treatment. It was, we're both here. This sucks. Who are you? Hi, and so on. Yep. So we became really, really close, and his parents and, well, his dad and my parents became very close, kind of supporting each other as well. And he got discharged from the hospital about 2 weeks before I did. And before he left, he got me a massive teddy and a really nice card that said, "Get better soon, love, Alex." And I had been really upset. That sounds really selfish, doesn't it? I was upset he got out of hospital. And I don't mean it like that, but you lost your friend, didn't you?
Yeah.
So to kind of cheer me up, so my dad used to be in the police, and he used to always talk to Alex about flying up in a police helicopter. And so to cheer me up, Mum and Dad had arranged for Alex to come to Scotland and to do the police helicopter thing and everything when I get out. So when I got out, I think it was about 2 or 3 days before he was due to come, that we got a call to say that he was dying. And after a long and kind of hard fight with cancer, he passed away in his own home. And I think it was then that I remember, I don't know what it was in me, but I just thought, how come I get better and he didn't? And then there was just something that thought, if I raise money, if I fundraise, maybe another child that wouldn't die, because the hospital would have machines. And I don't know why I thought it. I don't know if when I was in hospital I was hearing of other people making donations, or because you hear about, donations of PlayStations and of games and whatever. So I think it must have come from that. And then that was kind of my drive. I thought, I want to stop other wee boys like Alex passing away, and I want to make sure that the hospital that saved my life, one, knows how grateful I am, and two, gets to continue doing the work that it done and the work that it done for me. And I don't know if you remember, but she used to do, I think, Dancing with the Stars in America, Kat Deely.
Oh yeah, I love her.
Yes. So she became the patron of the hospital, and at that time she used to present a show called Stars in Their Eyes in the UK, and that was what me and my dad would watch every Saturday night together. So my dad was like, well, why don't you write to the fundraisers at Great Ormond Street and see if tell them that you love Kat Deely and that you were a patient and da-da-da. So wrote them an email, and they came back and they were like, would you be willing to come and talk about your experiences? We've got an event on at the Hard Rock Cafe in London, and Kat Deely is going to be there. So I was like, anything to meet Kat Deely. And I'd never spoken publicly in my life before, especially, I think when you're young, you don't realise it's such a personal thing anyway, but I'd never spoken publicly or that publicly about being in hospital and stuff like that. But I thought, you know what? I'll try it. If it's a flop, it's a flop, but I'll get over it. So then did that, absolutely loved it, and for some reason they really liked me and the story that I shared. So they continued inviting me along to fundraising events to basically just speak about why the hospital was so important, and it gave me the opportunity to talk a wee bit about bladder exstrophy, but that wasn't the focus of why I was there. It was to talk about the hospital. And then from that, I was credited with helping to raise just over £1 million for the hospital, and I'm really bad, so I don't know what that equates to in American currency.
It's okay, I'm really bad at conversions too.
That's fine. So I then won an award called the Pride of Britain Award, which is an annual television award show which basically celebrates non-celebrities who have maybe overcome adversity and gone on to do a bit of greater good for people. So the fundraisers at the charity have nominated me for that, which I won back in 2006. And just from all of that experience, I realised that I loved events management. So I decided to study it at university. Studied events management for 4 years at university, got the degree. And then I think, as with a lot of events management students, I went and started working in hotels and things like that. And it's really weird because even after all like my fundraising experiences, I'd never thought of it as a career that I would do. So I was just in hotels, you know, doing weddings and stuff, which is incidentally where I met my husband, in a hotel. And then about 4 years ago, a job came up as an assistant fundraiser at a charity in Scotland. And I was like, give it a bash. Like maybe I would be in with a shot because of my Pride of Britain and stuff. And now 4 years on, I'm still doing it and absolutely loving it. It's an amazing job. But yeah, again, if it wasn't for having bladder exstrophy, I wouldn't have fundraised for Great Ormond Street, and I don't think I'd be a fundraiser now. I don't know what I would be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was kind of my story, and obviously I'll always be a huge supporter of that hospital. And funnily enough, I actually got back in touch with Alex's family about 5 years ago because I got a tattoo of his name on my shoulder, and the writer of the Peter Pan books, so he'd given all of the rights to Great Ormond Street so that all the money that comes through the Peter Pan story and franchise and whatever goes straight to them. So it's his name, and then it's a Peter Pan silhouette, which is quite nice because it's also like the boy who never grew up. And then from that, my mum managed to find his sister on Facebook, and she'd said, you know, did you have a brother called Alex? And she was a bit like, yeah, who are you? Why? And then my mum had told her, and through that I've managed to get back in touch with Alex's sister and family again, which was really nice because she sent me through like pictures of him and stuff when he was younger and pictures when he wasn't in hospital, which is obviously not the way I remembered him. So it was nice to see him like as a healthy little boy. So
yeah. Wow. Oh, I just got goosebumps.
I think this is the first time I've spoken about it and not cried. So yay. But yeah, so that's basically how I get into fundraising, talking about what I've been through, getting to talk to amazing people who support charities, and this is the professional fundraiser me coming out now. But yeah, basically getting to speak to the people that were there that wanted to support the organisation, and they did, and thanks to them, yeah, I got that award, you know, and it is thanks to the people who donated to Great Ormond Street that I got the award, because if I went up and spoke and nobody gave a penny, they'd be thinking, her story's not getting us anything. We're not inviting her back. But no, it was brilliant, and yeah, I just can't imagine doing anything different now.
Else. Yeah.
You get to go out and meet lots of people.
Where are you working now? You said you're working for a fundraiser.
Yes, so I work in the UK. It's a very well-known one. It's an amazing organisation to work for, but I've only been there for 5 months, so I feel like I'm still finding my feet, and it's working from home, which is nice. But yeah, when you've got a puppy, it's
yeah.
I'll say that. So we got him just before I got the job, and I always say getting a new job and a dog at the same time is probably not the wisest thing. But yeah, so my job now is basically to get to speak to people who want to support the organisation and say thanks, and very often, and they've got a really personal connection to the cause. So I think I cry nearly every day at work, but in a good way.
That's healthy.
I know, right? But yeah, like it is what it is. But yeah, you do. You get a bit emotional, and then obviously because of like my connection to Alex, it kind of feels like it's come a bit full circle, because obviously lost him to cancer, and now working for a cancer charity. So I feel like I'm still doing it for him. You know, I was doing it for Great Ormond Street where he was treated, and now, you know, I don't know. It feels strange, but yeah. Love
awesome.
It.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
I know. And that's the story of my life. But yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any other last thoughts or stories you want to tell us? Anything that we missed?
I don't think so. I don't think so. But just to say thanks to you for doing the podcast, because I think it is important that obviously people get to hear from other people who've gone through the same thing, because Googling stuff is never good. I mean, like, I'll sometimes Google stuff to do with bladder exstrophy and I'll get the fear, even when I'm reading it and I'm going, that's ridiculous. That very seldom happens. So yeah, if anybody, you know, has just found out that they're going to have a child with bladder exstrophy or has just had a child, don't Google anything.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even for the first podcast that I did, where it was like I was talking about my experience, I did a bunch of Google research, essentially.
Yeah.
Into different statistics, like how common it is in females and just like what it is. And I think I scared myself silly reading it. Like, none of that happened to me. Stop it.
I know. But it just sounds so much worse, I think, than what it is. And do you know what? Maybe it is actually not as bad as it is, but maybe just because we've gone through it all, it doesn't feel quite as like, but yeah, I think the fact that you're doing the podcast is really positive, and you've got a positive spin on it, which I think is really nice. And I think, have you been in touch with, or are you getting in touch with quite a few other people?
A few other
Tom
people.
had said so.
Yeah, he's been really great in sending me a few contacts.
Yeah.
So.
He's very, he knows everybody. I don't know how, but like he knows people in the UK that I don't know. And he's like, they're from Scotland, just a couple of hours away from you. So I gave them your name and I'm like, how did you meet them? how did you come across this one? And he's like, oh, I don't know, just okay. But yeah, no, it's really good that you're doing the podcast, and I'll share it with my networks, because I think it's just it's an awesome thing to do. It's raising awareness, isn't it? So, and it's probably quite cathartic for you, I would imagine, to just kind of speak to lots of people.
Because I mean, it's like we were saying, we didn't really realize when we were younger how different we were. It's like that hindsight of looking back and being like, wow, my experience really is that different from the other kids that I was going to school with, and I had no idea. I mean, a semblance of an idea, but I didn't understand like the whole of how different it is.
All of it. Yeah. And I think one other thing that would be good, obviously that's probably a whole other podcast, but a lot of people, even our age, are very anxious about dating and telling people. And I don't ever remember telling my husband about it. I can't remember. I think I just sort of slowly started telling him things, like I use a catheter to empty my bladder. Like really casual first date talk. I like the eyebrow flick that went with that. I know. I feel like if you could just have a picture of that. But yeah, like, and I've always said, like, obviously it's not always been plain sailing and like dating, but I always say, like, if somebody doesn't accept you for like who you are and what you've gone through, then do you really want them to be in your life? Yeah, I think dating is quite a big thing for people with extra. Maybe it's just the way I was brought up, but just tell people and see if they don't like it. You know, they don't like it. Yeah, I mean, if they can't handle it, then they're not right for you. They're not meant to be in your life long term. Exactly. And I always say, like, I do always say that I'm probably the only girl that my husband knows that can write her name in the snow with P. It's like, so that's so weird. And I'm like, but it's true, isn't it? So, you know, there are bonuses. If anybody's looking for a chat up line with exstrophy, that one didn't work. It did. It grossed him out a little bit, I think. But I was like, yeah, but you know, and I can't pee myself, so that's also a bonus. That's also a plus. I spent like 7 years of my life just constantly doing it, and now I can't do it at all anymore. So, but yeah, I think that's kind of everything covered, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you for having me. The time to chat. Oh no, thank you for having me. It was lovely to finally get to meet you. Yeah. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Body Talk with Becks. I hope you found it informative and as enjoyable as I did. It was really a pleasure talking to Kirsteen. If you did enjoy this episode, please leave me a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts at. To help me with this podcast, please consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. If you're interested in sharing your story or know someone who is, please feel free to reach out to me either on my website, www.bodytalkwithbecks.com, or you can find me on social media.